without further ado, we're going to start our slide off. So our slide off is an idea that we came up with because we have a couple people at our program who are excellent slide designers. One of our fellows is a fabulous slide designer. She has a background in graphic design. Warren Weekman, one of our faculty, is like the Jedi master of slide design. And then we have Kevin King over here, who is also a Jedi master of slide design. So what we're going to do for you guys now is we're going to talk to you a little bit about slide design, and then we are going to give you a couple different examples of ways that you could create slides for things in medical education. So let's get a couple more mics here.
And one last warning, if you don't have this, raise your hand and I'll bring you one. But if you don't have Camtasia on your computer, you'll be able to listen in on the last hour, but you will not be able to do any hands-on, which it's kind of intended to be hands-on. So I don't know if the hotel is going to let you, but we sent an email out, but try to download that Camtasia before we get started, okay? The media files are less important, but you really want to have the Camtasia already on there.
All right, so I'll let
awesome.
Sara Paradise take us away.
Okay. So I think this one's working. All right, so I just wanted to go over a few principal ideas behind slide design. So I personally have used most of my early career just the basic PowerPoint template. Even within this year, I've learned so many different techniques to augment your current slides and bring them to the next level. So this lecture is going to kind of go over some of those designs and then show you examples of ways that you might start to improve your slides. Don't get too sad when you see what they've done with it. I didn't create the slides, but I have mentors who did, so we're going to go through that, and you'll see like the epiphany, like the best slides ever. But I kind of want to start with some of the basic principles. So style is greater than substance, right? You think design's really important. It's really important how we present things. However, you also want to think about the fact that your substance is very important, right? We want to get our key points across, so you want to try to find that perfect balance between creating a very visually appealing slide while also highlighting the emphasis in what you want to, I guess, discuss. So both of them should work together synergistically when you're making a PowerPoint presentation. One of the gold standards as far as slide design literature would be Slideology by Nancy Duarte. She has her own company. She's created a number of different lectures on these topics. So if you want actually a text resource, you could look this up. There's also a few TED Talks where she goes over kind of how to give effective presentations and that sort of thing. So I would highly recommend reading this book or looking her up online, some of her lectures that she does. Okay, so one of the next principles is that audiences will either listen to what the presenter's saying or they're going to read. So you can't really do both. I know as ER docs, we're pretty good at multitasking. We think we're good at multitasking. But really, if you're going to be the very best presenter you want to be, you might actually just have a photo and talk. I think that's a higher level of presentation. It's not where I'm at personally to put up a photo and be able to discuss it and discuss all my key points in great length. Most of us start off as more of documenters, right? So you have most of the content. You'll see your residents, they have most of the content on the slide, so they can anchor to that and read that. The next level would be more of a teleprompter where maybe you're speaking. That's kind of what I'm doing now. I'm speaking, but I have little bullet points in my mind about what I'm saying. You might have notes on your PowerPoint that you're speaking about. And then more of the TED Talk style would be a presentation where you have just a photo or something really engaging where you're even speaking without any sort of cues. So you don't necessarily have to get there, but it would be ideal to try to work towards that goal. So another slide design idea is glance media. So this slide exemplifies that a billboard is something called glance media, where you're driving by and very quickly you know what the billboard is saying to you. What if you drove by on the freeway and saw this, right? Like, what's the key point here? Like, what are they trying to say? And this is unfortunately how a lot of our PowerPoint slides are, right? So you really want to think about highlighting the key points, and we'll go over a few of those concepts now. So here's some of the main concepts of slide design. We're going to go over a couple of the most important ones going over this slide. So here's a slide that is trying to show you the major topics in Great Gatsby. So if you were to look at this and read it, what do you think just answer yourself, what do you think the main point of this slide is? As a lecturer, I'm going to actually tell you the main point of The Great Gatsby is idealism. You can't relive the past. When I first read this, I didn't even get to that bullet because it's buried, it's smaller text, there's so much on here. So one thing that you want to try to do is decrease your signal to noise ratio. So the signal to noise ratio basically means you want to highlight the most important content. So maybe you make idealism the header of the slide and then put everything else beneath it. Maybe you make it colored to emphasize it. That kind of increases the signal to all the noise. Another idea is hierarchy. So like I said, you could put that first. Maybe you just put the word idealism and then you speak about it. That would be more of an expert level of discussion. As scientists, we like graphs. I actually don't personally love graphs, but it's easy to put in a presentation to display information, right? So maybe you make this graph and you think you're like being really cool and you show all the data. But what if, as a lecturer, you want your learners to just really focus on one thing? Maybe you really want them to know that 76% of people prefer dogs. Why are you putting all that other stuff in there when you could really just highlight the key point? So I want you to think about how you're showing graphs, and maybe that's not the very best way to show information. Maybe you just want to exemplify the percentage of people that, you know, like dogs in this case. Here's another slide that kind of goes over some concepts of graphs. So you can see you start with a blank background. Maybe you add the data, which is a lot of different data. Maybe then you decide, okay, this is actually what I want to emphasize from all this data, and you make it a colored sort of feature. And then you might put it all together to compare and contrast, but you still have that emphasis by using a graph rather than just having all of it together. Okay, so here's another just example of some of the concepts that we went over already. So this is a very basic PowerPoint that I've seen, you know, even at national lectures, you'll see sometimes people use like the generic PowerPoint slide design. So learning to ride. So you're kind of reading through this. There's a lot of noise, not much signal. So maybe the first thing you do is actually put color, right, on those topics that you want to highlight. So play around with that. Then maybe you decide, actually, I just kind of want to increase the white space so that my learner just focuses in on those key points. So you just put those. And then last but not least, you would get to the highest level, just having a photo and being able to discuss it. Now time for the slide off.
All right, so we're going to start the slide off here. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our presenters. So myself, I made my slide deck with Beth Runcie, our other educational fellow. She's at Essentials right now, but she is a graphic designer by background, and she is phenomenal. So I can't take full credit for my slides. We've got Sara Paradise here, who will be presenting Dr. Warren Weekman, our slide master. Slide deck. And then we've got Kevin King also here, another slide master who's got his own slide deck that he'll be presenting as well. So we're going to start off with the first challenge. So the first challenge we had was, how do you make objectives interesting? And how do you make them fun? Instead of just this, what can you do to make it a little bit more awesome? So we'll start off with Sara Paradise and Warren Weekman.
Yes.
And here is their slide design.
Okay, so let's say you're giving a lecture and you want to kind of create continuity in the lecture. This is what Warren developed to kind of get your key objectives or your key points. So he has 5 main points. He used color to kind of go through each one. Maybe you cover a concept and then you go on to your next point, and then you would show this slide again, engaging the 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is a very, very visually appealing way to create continuity in your lecture.
So in all fairness, I learned my slide design from Warren Weekman. So my slide objectives aren't too different. So I basically just little dots along a line. I changed my color as I go through each objective to highlight what's important, which one we're going to next. And then in the end, just brought them all up nice and bright. That way your learners can still see it. I think objectives are one of those that are hard to completely take away all of the text, because you do want them to be able to see what the objectives are, and you do want them to be able to pick up the slides later and see what the objectives are. So I tried to keep my objectives a little bit shorter, you know, a keyword up top and then what they're going to be doing. All right. Take it away, Kevin.
All right, so in mine, I'm kind of a fan of graphics and movement in slide design. So this is my design where I just went through the objectives and had a sliding bar to highlight the piece that I wanted to talk to you about at the time, and then a fade out, but still visible to everybody, and there's one more there. And so that's kind of what I enjoy doing, is the movement piece.
So a great resource when you're designing your slide decks is this website, colors.com. I can sit on this website for hours just like clicking through. It'll give you a series of colors and kind of colors that blend well together, look great together. And when you like one, you can just click on a color and then keep hitting the next button, and it'll bring up more colors that match that one. Like I said, I'll start to make a slide deck, and I'll choose a couple colors, and then 45 minutes later, I'm still looking at pretty colors. But it's a ton of fun, and it's a great way to make your whole slide series look really pretty together.
And part of what I enjoyed, I started using colors this competition, hadn't used it before. And so if you're a Macintosh user, there's actually a utility called Color Meter. It's in the Utilities folder under your apps. I don't know how to do it on Mac, but what you need is there's a RGB or red, green, blue color code for every color your computer can make. And that's what you need to be able to put into colors and also to be able to pull it back out to put into your presentation. If you want to know what I'm talking about, we can talk about that after the fact, but it's very easy to use and a lot of fun.
All right, challenge number 2. So challenge number 2 was how do you make a, oh, go ahead. We'll talk about that. We'll get there. Some of them we create ourselves, and some of them we do actually get from a program, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit.
So it might be worthwhile. The introduction ones we just went through, I made my own template.
I made my own template, and Warren made his own template.
So those are all just...
Those are all homemade.
But there's so much that can be done just by taking 2 squares and putting them slightly offset and making each one a different color, making it your background. I mean, that's how I did mine. It's a very simple approach.
And in all fairness, once you start making them, I go back and I steal my templates that I've created myself from other presentations, and a lot of my objectives look the same. You know, it's just how it works out. And that's totally fine. You know, you start building them, you'll put a lot of time into your first slide deck, and then each subsequent slide deck takes less and less time. So challenge number 2 was taking a really boring flowchart and making something fun out of it. So Sarah and Warren.
Yeah, so the way that Warren designed this one was basically just to make it very color-coded. I think it's really easy to look at this and immediately be able to kind of go down your algorithm and see what the different triage levels are and what you would do as an action.
So Beth and I had a similar slide design. We wanted it to kind of flow from left to right because that's how we read, rather than up and down. We thought it made a little bit more sense to us. But the same thing, we just wanted it color-coded. We wanted it to be the same colors that you're using and make it a little bit more visually appealing and easier to zone in on different areas.
And so this one, I actually found a triage tag that was laid out like this and decided that I wanted to try and make it. So this is a yes-no question. So is the patient walking? And the answer is yes. They're a minor, and that means they're unlikely to deteriorate. If the answer is no, you go to the next question. Are they not breathing? If the answer to not breathing is yes, they're expectant, and that means they're unlikely to survive. If the answer to not breathing is no, then you ask the next questions, I guess yes, and then no, otherwise delayed. And this allows us to walk through very quickly and kind of show how you would do a triage. I found a triage tag online and figured out how to kind of do that presentation. And that was just using, believe it or not, just some simple wipes in transitions. It's a very simple graphic effect to obtain.
And I think an easy thing to think here is if you're still back at that stage where you're just doing a straight, flow chart that's going down and you're not doing anything else, one of the key things that we all did together was we changed our colors to make them bright and to make them match what we were talking about. Start Triage has these colors already associated, so you may as well use them. It'll imprint in your learner's mind a little bit more. Challenge number 3. This one was rough. So this was taking the influenza data from the CDC and trying to make it interesting and trying to highlight the key points. So this one was a whole lot of work.
All right, so obviously, we talked about graphs a little bit earlier, so this just kind of gets back to some of those concepts. These were Warren's notes on what the overall idea was. So flu hit hard, a lot of people died, kids died disproportionately, and it started earlier and rose quicker. So if you go to the way that he decided to show the graph, so he wants his learners to know flu season is bad, right? It's very bad. That's the key point. And then he showed some of the graphs as far as years. So as you go down, you can see that at the end in 2018, the flu season, that red peaked very quickly and went very high. compared to some of the previous years, compared to the epidemic and basic level. So he used arrows to kind of emphasize that. In the same way here, remember earlier how we talked about the dogs, preference of dogs? He just put the number of deaths based on the year. So that's kind of highlighting that key point. And then here's another graph showing this year, and what he basically decided to do, if you click, I think one more, maybe not, just kind of shows the peak. So he just blocked everything out. Instead of having all those lines, it's very busy, a lot of noise, he just kind of locked out what the usual is, and then what he wants you to focus on is that the influenza deaths peaked very quickly this year, and they were higher than previous years. And then again, here's another way to just demonstrate the information. So the number of specimens tested, the percent positive, and then 77% were influenza A. And here we also want to highlight the resistance to antiviral treatment because that's important to us as ER doctors. So you can kind of see how he decided to exemplify that information.
All right, so we went with kind of a similar approach. We kept one of the main graphs. This is the one that Warren kind of blocked out certain areas, and instead what we did was we just highlighted the key points and put big red arrows. This is what you need to know. Pay attention here, look here, you know, to kind of highlight it. Little circle around it, big red arrow to point it out, and then a little bit more information on the bottom. So just a single graph. We didn't do all of them, but we highlighted the key points with additional circles, with big arrows, and sort of pointed out what was necessary. Rather than the learner having to really spend time looking at that graph, it immediately draws their eye in to what's important.
All right, so in this deck, I was trying to make an infographic and then be able to have the audience use that infographic. And in the end, what you're going to see is this turns out to be a little on the small side. What I wish I had done was build it up close up front so that you could see it. But anyway, so what I did here is we have the years across the bottom and then some arrows pointing out highest mortality. And then pediatric deaths, good, it should build still, goes ahead and shows you pediatric deaths plus my key point here, which was we got 12 weeks to go in this year's flu season. There are 84 deaths already. And then the next quadrant was, again, that outpatient visits for flu in previous years. That's this year, which makes for some very long night shifts. It should build in. There it goes. There you go. So that delta there means it's going to be a rough year for us when you're working night shifts. And then a few other tidbits that I threw in at the end here. Again, just using some graphics to build in 740,000 specimens showing the positivity and how much the flu A is, and then also your resistance, the piece being, yeah, I'll go ahead and give the Tamiflu. So again, the flaw here was a little on the small side for a big slide, but I think it turned out to be a fairly nice infographic. There are ways to get around that I wish I'd built in.
So this kind of brings us back to some good resources for figuring this out. Slideology is absolutely amazing. Nancy Duarte does a fabulous job talking about different slide design and what's important. And some of the key things that we all sort of did on this, this slide deck was experimenting with different shapes and colors and kind of highlighting what's important. So if you go back to Warren's slides, you know, he blocked out certain areas and highlighted certain things in red. If you go to Beth's and my slide, we put that big circle and that big red arrow to kind of highlight it and show what's important. Same thing with Kevin's slides. You know, he's got those words above it. He has things wipe in. That way you can see that line kind of grow. So all of those really help you out. Another thing that's important is experimenting with your text size and where you put your text. So sometimes all you need to do is make that key point 20 font sizes bigger, so it really stands out on the page, and you can keep the other words, but you're highlighting what that true thing is. You know, if you think about that Great Gatsby slide, if we just made the word idealism, you know, 15 points bigger, it would have actually stood out. And then your reader would have immediately been drawn into that, and they would have seen that key point. And that's super easy. You can take any of your slide decks and go in and bold something or change the font color, make it bigger, and right then and there you've already added some design elements to make your slides a little bit more visually appealing and make them draw your learner in as well. Additionally, one of the other things we all did was kind of highlighting those key points on your graphs. Just putting a big arrow, putting a big dot, something that, you know, again, brings your learner in to look at that. So challenge 4, trying to think of what challenge 4 was. Oh, challenge 4 was the temperature-related illness. I'm going to board review. Yeah, board review. All right, so take it away.
All right, so here's the notes that you want to use to create your slide. We're going to talk about temperature-related illnesses, how heat is transferred. So here's kind of how he decided to create this. So how is heat transferred? And he used different graphics to kind of highlight each of those. So it's very pretty, very visually appealing.
I'm sorry, do you mind if I point something out on that slide real quick?
Go for it.
The one that he just showed, just something I want to show you all. Sometimes it can be very difficult to get text over a picture, especially one where there's a variety of different colors and brightnesses in the background. All he did was put in a gray rectangle in the background that was semi-transparent that really helps those letters pop. That is a trick that took me, I don't know, about 2 years to figure out. I highly recommend that gray semi-transparent background on a photo or drop shadow on the text. Really makes those letters pop a little bit more. Okay.
Yeah. Or
Make the image decrease the opacity of the image too.
Yep.
yeah, and or if you do have an image, like try to find the lightest area so that your text is actually popping out, right? Or the most contrasted area. So here's where he's going through, again, using those boxes like you demonstrated, the heat exhaustion versus heat stroke. It's pretty easy to read that and see what the main issue is with each of them and then the treatment options. In contrast, he has hypothermia using photos and then the grayed out box. Different colors for each of the sections so you can kind of quickly scan through and read. And then lastly, the different types of cold-related illnesses, so the frost, nip, chilblains, pernio, frostbite, the things I always get wrong on my board exams. So, yeah. Although I just finished both my boards, so hopefully I passed, yeah.
So this is what we started with. This is what we were given, was, hey, here's the black book. Take this chapter and make something pretty. So Beth and I went kind of the same way. We chose colors and backgrounds that kind of related to what we were talking about. We did specifically temperature-related illnesses and turning up the heat. We kind of had our key points here of what we were going to talk about. And then on the next slide, we kept that same background. And again, just tried to keep the wording very simple because we wanted them to see the key points. But then we went through and we highlighted all of the really important things that we wanted to make sure that they actually saw. You know, again, keep that bright color, underline the important things, put some arrows, just kind of highlight it right then and there. This is what's important for our learners.
And then also on your slide, the thing I would also point out is you can adjust the angle of the text. That looks like it's handwritten notes. Makes it pop a little bit more. It's just kind of an interesting approach. I really like that. But angling the text sometimes just a little bit makes a big difference. Yeah. Okay, on my slides, what I did is I found this template of a body, heat transfer, and all I'm doing is just taking in radiation, evaporation, conduction, and convection, and filling in the body on how the different puzzle pieces fit together to talk about heat transfer in the human body. And then to show the different types of heat illness, basically just comparative table that builds with a background graphic that just makes it a little bit more interesting. And you get the idea here. Now, one of the things that's interesting is sometimes the colors don't quite translate. So that dude on the left is really supposed to not be gold, but more of an orange color. And that's just sometimes a difficulty that you run into. So be very careful when using very similar colors, because a lot of times these projectors can't project it. It'll always look better on your screen.
So a great resource, we all use Google, right? And we all know about Google Images. But something that's really important is when you're pulling up graphics for your presentations is you want to make sure you have the best quality possible. And an easy way to do that is to go to your Google Images, and then you go to your tools, and then you choose Images and Size. And if you click on large, you're going to get the biggest graphics possible, which means when you put them on your PowerPoint, they're not going to get fuzzy, they're not going to get grainy, they're still going to look really good, okay? Another thing that I highly encourage people to do is to try and choose copyright-free graphics, all right? So Wikipedia Commons is a great place to go if you need something more medical related, but an easy way to do this within Google is same thing. You're going to go to your image search, you're going to choose your tools, and then you're going to choose usage rights. When you click on that, it'll drop down and it'll say copyright free, labeled without modification, use without modification, that sort of stuff. And so if you're going to be giving a presentation at a national conference, or you want to publish your slides with like MAEd Portal or GenerationÄ or something like that, you're going to want to use graphics that are copyright free. And so that's a great place to get them. There's a lot of things that are available, and a lot of graphics that you can get that are copyright free. All right. Challenge number 5 was a case presentation or an M&M type presentation, which is something we all do a lot in emergency medicine. All right.
Okay, so this is basically the standard M&M, and I think we've all seen, I remember my residency M&M my senior year, and I had like the whole, you know, HPI and the whole slide was full, and then the physical exam, the whole slide was full. So now, from what I've learned, you can kind of block off different areas of it and make it more visually appealing. It kind of is like a chart. So it's going through, it has a chart, and then it has the vitals. He used little graphics to make it kind of more fun and interesting. If you keep going, now he's going to do the exam. So this is kind of like that little Epic Man where you can point out different features. So here's the salient features of what he kind of wanted you to notice. So the remainder was normal. Do we really care about all the normals? Probably not, right? We probably want to just focus on the things that were abnormal, or if someone asked, you could say, yeah, that was normal. So then you can have them go through the differential, the workup. You could do this where you have things kind of come in as they state it. Here's the results with the images, and then, oh, by the way, all of a sudden the wife comes in, and you see how he did like a different color border with a pertinent piece of information that came up.
All right, so, oh.
Yep.
Okay. Beth and I set ours up kind of similarly. Again, I learned my slide design from Warren, so some of my tricks are the same as his. But basically, we were going with the same thing. We put up what we wanted our learners to go through, kind of already, this is what we're going to be talking about. These are our objectives for this case presentation. And then I had everything just kind of make a little bar up top, and we highlight each bar as we walk through. So here's our subjective. We go to our objective. This is the information. My little bar changes spots. We go to our physical exam. I'm like a huge fan of this operation guy. I love using him for my physical exam findings. And, you know, same thing, just a big arrow, a big bullseye, pointing out what's abnormal, pointing out what's important, what we need to know about. And then just kind of talking through the key points as we go through our physical exam. And same thing, highlight it in a different color, add a different font there, make it a little bit more stand out in your face. And then talking about the differential, we kind of quadranted out our slide in the same way that you would someone's abdomen and put the differentials in those different spots to talk through with the learners. And we could have easily had these, you know, fade in as we talked about them. So we could have been like, all right, well, let's start in the right upper quadrant. You know, what do you think's going on? And then I could have clicked and it could have popped in. But just an easy way to lay things out that visually is the same way that you think about it as with your patient.
Okay, so I took an approach very similar to Warren, but one of the things I wanted to show you today is just I did, again, some whites to try and help it maintain its visual interest. So just H&P with a color. By the way, I'm terrible with colors, and I use the Colors website to match everything up. I usually have to consult with my wife of whether or not something matches, and so this really helps me out a lot. Okay, keep on going. So this is just the H&P. Then we got the physical exam, and don't click too fast. There you go.
Sorry.
Okay, so you notice that it shows you, and then when you click to go to the next one, it shrinks it down and then moves on to the next piece. Keep on going. And so this is just something I did to try and help maintain that kind of interest in how the slide builds. Go ahead and click. And then we get a little bit of deadly differential diagnosis. And these graphics were, when you see how the skull and everything are tilted, again, don't be afraid to just rotate those a little bit to make them more interesting. They were actually horizontal when I first started, and I just tilted them a little bit. And then in red with the blue background, that additional surprise history.
So this toolbox for Keynote, that's that question that we got earlier. This is like one of my absolute favorites. It's not super expensive. It's absolutely awesome. It was like 30 bucks.
No, it's more than that.
Was it?
I want to say, okay, so toolbox for Keynote. Don't be afraid of this app because every single graphic I used is in it.
It's amazing. It's
amazing.
so awesome.
You get great ideas, have great slide builds, super duper templates. I think it's about $100, but it includes updates forever.
Really?
Yeah, it was somewhere between 30 and 100.
I bought it like a year ago.
But it's updates forever. So I always am constantly getting these, hey, you have 72 new templates to look at. It's really cool. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, all kinds of templates, all kinds of graphics. The color schemes are absolutely phenomenal. Like sometimes I'll go in there just to look for a color scheme because I can't, like my brain's just not coming up with anything, and I'll look through their slides and I'll be like, gray and yellow, that's what I'm going to use today. That's perfect. So not only great templates, great graphics, great color schemes, really awesome. Works wonderful for Keynote. There is some similar ones out there for Microsoft Office for PowerPoint if you're a PowerPointer, although I highly recommend switching over to Keynote. Keynote's kind of awesome. There's some additional ones like eDraw for Windows. PictoChart is pretty awesome as well. If we go back to Keynote again, Toolbox for Keynote, it also has infographic templates, which are really cool as well if you want to make an infographic for something. eDraw, PictoChart, And that brings us up to challenge number 6. So challenge number 6 was a review of a study. Not my strong point.
Okay, so here's kind of the original paper that we utilized to create the slide design. So you can kind of see, here's a case that you would actually see in real life. Here's the paper we're going to be reviewing. You kind of have that highlighted so it's still there. And then you go through, okay, here's the players. Here's the different steroid options. What are the differences in them? What does the research show? So he just kind of used different blocks in the center there and then highlighted the text on each side to kind of separate it out. And then here's our actual clinical question. He just has it on a slide alone. This is the most important thing that we want to glean from this paper. So you can see how if you're reviewing a journal, it's a lot more, I guess, learner appealing to see this format versus having the paper in front of them. Although they should read it and learn how to do this, but this kind of helps them to digest it. So here's bottom line. Single dose is non-inferior.
So I'm not going to lie, I had no, I was of no use when it came to creating this set of slides because I saw the journal article and I was like, I'm out. Beth, you can take over this one. So Beth did this entire slide deck. So what she did was similar to kind of what we talked about before, just big words, different colors to kind of highlight different areas. When she brings up the next one, it's similar to what we were saying before, just a big block of color, big question mark. What's our clinical question? What are we getting to? What do we care about? And then again, big words to let you know, like, this is important. There is a difference. So not a lot of text, but she did bold the areas that were important, bold the areas that we really wanted our learners to pay attention to. So simple, you know, we used a lot of words on these slides, but she did bold things, she did highlight things to kind of make it a little bit more visually appealing and again to draw your learner into those important concepts.
And one thing I want to point out here, if you have a line of text, you could use a different font to highlight it, right? So it says non-inferior in a different font type to kind of engage rather than just bolding. So that's another technique you could try very easily.
So just to editorialize very briefly, I built a kind of a subsegment of this. If you're looking, you know, a lot of people talk about the slide design, and it takes a lot of time to develop visually interesting slides. These slides that you're about to see, I built starting yesterday. I think I started working on about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I finished them about 5. So about 4 hours to build what you're about to see. Part of it was because I made a mistake and put them on the wrong format slide. So both PowerPoint and Keynote have this habit of defaulting to a 16:9 aspect ratio. That's widescreen TV. I have yet to present on a widescreen projector. So you've got to get them to 4:3, and when you do that, it reformats everything, and that's part of what I ran into. But probably conservatively, about 3 hours to build what you're about to see. Okay. So I started out with basically just, here we go, PICO, what does this study look at? And back it up just for a second. Let me just get them started. That's okay. So all I have is the study question in the middle there, and then PICO across the bottom. Again, I wrote this like students or residents, and then we're just going to kind of talk about what each one does. And so I have a box that comes up, and then we build in what the population is. And then it gives you a little mini thing down there at the bottom, and I'm just going to click through these, and you can kind of see what it does. Okay, again, the idea being helping them do the PICO analysis. Okay, there you go. And then I have a little thing that falls down here. Yep, this is a quality study in my opinion, okay? And that, yep, so.
All right, challenge 7 was taking the HEART score and making it interesting for our learners. So taking a decision-making tool and making it a little bit more interesting.
All right, so the way that Warren did this is kind of like a flowchart style. So I'd encourage you guys just open up your PowerPoint or Keynote and just see what different flowchart diagrams are available. You'd be surprised. A lot of the already preloaded stuff is actually pretty cool, and you don't have to actually develop your own if you're not at that level yet. So this is kind of one of the more basic ones, but he added that right-sided column with some cool features, the different numbers 0, 1, 2, and then the different colors as you go down. So it's very easy to create a score.
So Beth and I did something very similar. We just chose 2 basic colors. Again, this is just a box. This purple area is just a transparent purple box. So nothing super fancy, just font going straight across. Highlight the important things. So what are the risk factors? Highlighting out what they are with just a big arrow in another box. Highlighting out the total score and what you do with it. And then just pointing out that you can also get it somewhere else. You know, just pulling in a phone graphic to talk about that you can get it on your phone. So, you know, nothing too fancy, just some different colors and some basic boxes, just making things bright and, you know, trying to decrease the wordage on the page. And then that kind of brings us into resources. So a lot of these we've already talked about. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. For images and slides, you know, colors, great place to get different colors. These are all up on the Schoology as well. Slideology, awesome resource. I really enjoy reading this on the plane. I'll just kind of flip through it. You can kind of start it wherever and flip through a couple pages and you'll learn something. Google Images, choose large, make sure it's labeled for reuse if you're going to present it somewhere. Toolbox for Keynote, Microsoft Office, eDraw, PictoChart. Canva is a great online resource. They do a lot of slide building, so you'll go on there, you'll create an entire slide, and then you can download it and import it into your Keynote or into your PowerPoint. I've used it also, like I said, for backgrounds or for graphics and stuff. So that's it.
And then one other piece that I would just recommend, I love pulling video into my talks a lot, and I'm sure everybody around here does. Be very careful that you embed the video and not a hyperlink. You will never get the internet to work correctly. Actually, the success rate of your internet connection on your presentation working is indirectly proportional to the number of people sitting in the room waiting for you. For sure. So you have 1,000 people, there's about a 0% chance it'll work properly. There are a lot of tools that you can use to do that. In fact, we're going to do a talk on one of the tools here in a little while, but just be very careful using any kind of active internet connection in your talks. Yes, ma'am.
Definitely. So PowerPoint, one of the good things about PowerPoint is that pretty much everyone uses it, right? So it's available on PCs, it's available on Mac. You know, you can take your PowerPoint from a Mac and put it up on a PC, and chances are it's going to look pretty good and pretty similar. You might have some issues with fonts, and there are ways to get around that by changing all of your fonts to graphics. There's different programs that do that, and if anybody has any questions, I can tell you about that because I download a ton of fonts and change them. So PowerPoint's great because it's pretty much, you're able to use it everywhere. Some of the things I don't like about PowerPoint is some of the transitions are a little bit more jerky. I think the graphic editing within PowerPoint is not quite as awesome as Keynote. There's some things in Keynote called like Instant Alpha where you can completely remove a background like that. It's like 2 clicks and the background of the entire graphic can go away, which is really awesome when you're trying to personalize things. There are some transitions in Keynote called like Magic Move that are really fun, that can make one object move from slide to slide and like really help your transitions look a little bit more seamless, a little bit more professional. So in that respect, I think Keynote has some better graphic aspects, some better transition aspects. PowerPoint obviously is far more universal. One of the things we run into is we're all Mac people, and so we do everything on Keynote, and then I have to export it to a PowerPoint, and then once I export it to a PowerPoint for a presentation, I have to go through and look and make sure all my fonts kept and my transitions still look okay because they're not quite the same. But then it's a PowerPoint, and then everyone else can use it. Kevin brought up a really interesting or a good point. Whenever I present, I always make sure that I have my Keynote, I have a PowerPoint, and then I almost always have a PDF of my slides as well. And when I build my slides, you guys will see on the deck when you go and look on Schoology, I don't do a lot of animation within each slide. I will have what's probably only going to be 20 slides, but it'll end up being 100 because one slide will have everything in black, and then one area will be highlighted in yellow on the next slide, and I build them up like that. That way, if anything goes wrong, and I can't get my Keynote to work, I can't get my computer to connect, I can't get my PowerPoint to cross over because now we're using a PC, I can pull up my PDF and flip from slide to slide, and it automatically still looks the same.
So that Pico slide that I had there, that was 18 different slides. Just to kind of give you an idea of what Shannon's talking about. One of the big advantages to Keynote, if you're a Macintosh user, it's free.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay for it. It's included with your Mac. I'm a huge Keynote guy, but the biggest problem that I've run into is I gave a talk at a national conference in emergency medicine, and I walked up with my Macintosh, and the guy's like, "What's that?" I said, "That's my computer." He's like, "You can't use it." And I had to export everything to PowerPoint in an hour, and it was a disaster. So it's really important if you're going to use Keynote that you must pay attention to where you're giving the talk. When I go to a medical school, it's no problem because I'm expected to plug into the projector anyway. Everybody expects that. But at a national conference, it's really important if you're going to use Keynote to make sure that they accept keynote. We had to do that for this talk, actually.
Yeah. Another nice thing about keynote that I really like, so this slide design thing is 170 something slides. It is about 2 gigs. It is a massive file, but Keynote lets you export it as a reduced file size, which is really nice for uploading and sharing. So the reduced file size is only 50 megabytes, which is pretty tiny, all considered. Whereas PowerPoint, you can't do that. I've yet to figure out a good way to reduce my slides in PowerPoint.
You can. There's a way to do it.
There is.
Yeah.
I've yet to figure it out.
It's hard.
A couple other things. I'm one of the more basic people in slide design, and I find that once you get over a very short initial learning curve on Keynote, the more complicated things are much simpler and more straightforward if you're already used to a Mac. And the things like embedding a video, it's drag and drop like everything on a Mac, whereas it's much more complicated in PowerPoint. So PowerPoint, if you're okay just being mediocre in both, Keynote's probably a little harder. If you want to get a little bit better, it's easier to get better at Keynote than it is to get better at PowerPoint, because embedding things and doing more advanced things in PowerPoint is really complicated. So I prefer Keynote from that standpoint.
Yeah, agreed completely.
So I have a Mac, but I use PowerPoint mostly. So a little contrary view. I agree that the transitions are harder with PowerPoint, but I tend not to like things zooming around on the slide, so I don't do those very much. But my PowerPoints are huge. They're big, and so that's hard to mail. Yeah. But you can do most of this on PowerPoint. But a lot of it is just starting with a blank template, though, and then creating your own vision of what you want it to look like.
Yeah. So. In terms of like building slides, when I start my presentations, I start with a plain white background, and all my text goes on it in black. And I will have like 10 slides that just have pure text. And then what I'll slowly start doing is I'll start copying slides, and I'll start moving some of that text from the top down to the bottom into the presenter notes for what I'm planning on talking about. And then I'll start building the graphics on my slides. And that kind of gives me a good baseline. It moves everything into the presenter notes. That way I have that information there. And also because a lot of times my learners will want my slides. And so then they can still read it. It's still there, even though my slides don't usually have a ton of information on them. And then I'll start just slowly building that way.
And I think that all of us, we have our presentations that we do that are very intricate and very graphic-y. And so when I give a national talk, I'll spend, let's say, somewhere between 50 and 100 hours prepping that talk. 80% of that time is designing the slides.
Yeah.
20% or so is reading the articles and kind of pulling out what I want to do. But so for a big talk, 20 hours of research and reading, and about 80 hours of slide building to get a 1-hour talk. It sounds overwhelming. That's why I don't give these super intricate graphic talks very often, and I have about 5 or 6 that are in my stable, and then I will revert to just a couple of keywords and text. Yep. I tell you, just putting up a single word on the screen and talking about it is a lot more interesting to people than paragraphs of information on the screen and then you reading the paragraph to them. So just a few thoughts. I don't do this for every single presentation I give. I just don't have that kind of time.
Yeah. One more question.
Can you talk a little more about what you do for reviews? So like board reviews, like we do a big in-service review for our residents for the whole state with all the residencies. And it's, you get an hour slide and, can you talk about some ideas of how to get creative with that?
So Dr. Osborn created an absolutely amazing slide set for our board review, and they're phenomenal. They're black slides. They have fonts on them, and they just build in. So it'll be a question, and then the answers build in. And there's still a lot of text there, but it's appropriate for what we're doing. And so that's mostly of what we use for our board review. Some of the other ones, like I've got some.
Or
okay.
the quiz bowl.
Yeah,
as well.
we do quiz bowl as well.
So
yeah.
we did, at UCI they do a quiz bowl where essentially it's like using those audience response systems and having people select options, and then if they do well, they win that block. So we kind of organized it and each split it up, and so one person did cardiovascular, one person did trauma, and it was all interactive that way. So you might consider, if it's all lecture based, maybe making yours into a Kahoot. Again, the problem is that it's a character limit on the question, so you might have to use an image and just paste it in as an image if you want to have a longer question stem.
Yeah, I feel like board review is a little bit of an exception to the rule when you're talking about slide design, because you want to have some content there so that I think when you look at really good slide design, it's not necessarily reproducible in the sense that you can't just take the notes from the lecture and know what the lecturer spoke about. I think that this slide design is really important when we're giving engaging talks at things like national presentations and at our education conferences when we're doing things like grand rounds. But I think for something like board review, at least for me, I want the residents to be able to look back on the slides later and know what the content was. So sometimes I don't do as beautiful of slide design because I want the content. But the thing is, the opposite is that you're engaging the participants because you're asking them questions. And so it's not just you and the lecture show, and so you automatically have that engagement already built in. So it's kind of almost okay so long as your slides are visually appealing at least, but you may put some more text on it than you normally would, in my opinion.
And that brings up actually, I think, a good point. These slides, the really graphical ones, don't export well to a standalone product. Somebody can't take my slide decks and read them and really have a good idea of what I talked about. And that's a challenge. That's one of the limitations. So you've got to be aware of how your slides are also going to be used.
And that's one of the trouble that we have with GenerationÄ. I don't know if you guys are familiar with GenerationÄ, but that's a journal that we run out of UCI, where it's kind of like MAEd portal in that you submit stuff. And that's one of the things is I think it's hard for us to balance really good slide design with having that content be reproducible.
I think with
This is just a quick example of like our board review slides. So it's, I mean, we just highlight things in yellow. They build in, you know, that way.
Those
you
are really
select
ugly,
question
actually.
there and
Sorry.
you give your learners what?
I said those are like a little ugly. I like feel bad when it's being put
Very
on the
simple,
screen.
and that allows people to read it. And understand.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Elisa, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They
But not
build in
beautiful.
nicely so
Yeah.
that it like gives the learners a chance to actually look at the question and then answer it.
But for something like board review, I think it's a bigger deal as the engagement. So if just asking them if you don't have a residency or if it's such a big group, because it sounds like you're doing it for the whole state, that everyone won't partake, then pulling poll everywhere in and building it into slides. So I did one where they had a case question and they all answered. And then the answers came up and they were in groups based on their class level. So they were in a competition. And then we went over the concept that case was about. And then we did another one. And that was really well reviewed by the residents. So at that point, it's trying to find better ways to engage them than necessarily the design of slides.
I think that's such an important point. Like, I think the point is to do a lecture really well, you're going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on the slides. It's not going to be reproducible. And and that's kind of that's one trick in your repertoire. I think the point is try to bring in different stuff like team-based learning, small group learning, sim, oral boards. We do panels sometimes where we have like an internist, a family practitioner, emergency physicians, and we ask them questions like, how would you manage this patient's hypertensive episode? We bring in the community docs and orthopedists where we say, you know, we put some fractures on the screens and say, how would you handle this fracture pattern in the community hospital? How would you handle this in an academic medical center? So just trying to change your instructional design like Andy was talking about, so that you use a lot of different instructional designs so that you don't have to rely on spending hundreds of hours making your slide deck.
Something else that I do, I think the listening to the lecture with good graphics is easier and more engaging. The way I'll get around them not being able to reproduce or take the slides and have a meaningful understanding of it is to make a separate handout and then make that available either through a QR code or a bit.ly so that the handout is complete, and that's sort of they can take that and study that. So, but the slides are worthless to look at. They're just to anchor the story, to make it visual.
Yeah, I mean, it's a process. Like, I'm, a young person, and you'd think, oh, this is so intuitive to do as a young person, but it wasn't. And, like, I still revert occasionally back to my ways from residency where I would just give a very hour-long presentation, and it's a good presentation, but it's disengaging. So I think that if you're just getting started in this sort of thing, just try to work towards it and keep reminding yourself the goal is to engage, because your learners aren't going to go with you on your hour-long journey. You may think it's like a great content, everyone loves it, but unfortunately we all lose attention. So even if like a few slides in you insert a poll or something engaging, you've already re-engaged them at that point, and then you can kind of go back into content. So just keep plugging away and keep trying to use different techniques that kind of push you out of your comfort zone, and it'll get easier and easier.